A frantic man fumbles with his keys at 47 Summer Street. It is 5:15 in the evening on January 24th, 2023. He is carrying a takeout bag of pasta and salad for his wife and 3 young children. But as the door swings open, the warmth of the Duxbury home is gone. It is silent. Not a floorboard creaks. Not a child giggles. He calls out for his wife, Lindsay. Nothing. He runs upstairs, pushing open the master bedroom door, and sees a smear of red on the floor and an open window. He looks down into the snow and sees a body. He doesn't know it yet, but his life as a father ended 20 minutes ago. Massachusetts is a state built on tradition, prestige, and the perceived safety of the suburbs. We are told from birth that a mother's love is the one thing in this world that is truly unconditional. It is the ultimate safety net. But what happens when that net becomes a noose? What happens when the person who gave you life decides, with surgical precision, to take it back? From the luxury coastal towns to the grit of the city centers, the Commonwealth has been the stage for acts of maternal betrayal that defy every law of nature. These are not stories of accidents. These are stories of calculation, hidden lives, and a darkness that survives even in the brightest nursery. Today, we are peeling back the layers of the most evil mothers in Massachusetts history, spanning from 2002 to the present day of 2026. We are looking at the women who wore the mask of the perfect parent until the moment they let it slip. Before we go into our first case, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments and let us know what the weather is like where you are. If you are a fan of deep dive non-fiction and you want to ensure these victims are never forgotten, hit that subscribe button right now. Join the Cold Read community and never miss a chapter of these true stories. Case 1. Lindsay Clancy. To the outside world, Lindsay Clancy was the gold standard of motherhood. She was a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her entire career was dedicated to the safe arrival of newborns. Her social media was a gallery of smiling faces, beach trips, and the curated joy of a young family. But on that January evening in 2023, the mask didn't just slip, it was torn off. When Patrick Clancy found his wife lying in the backyard, paralyzed from a jump out of their second-story window, he asked her where the children were. She told him they were in the basement. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he found 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 7-month-old Callan. They weren't just dead. They had been executed with exercise bands. The investigation into Lindsay Clancy did not find a woman who had lost her mind in a sudden flash of heat. Instead, they found a woman who operated with the timing of a clockmaker. Detectives pulled the data from her phone and her husband's. On the afternoon of the killings, Lindsay had been playing in the snow with her kids. She looked normal. She sounded normal. At 4:02 p.m., she searched for Kids Miralax on her phone. Then she searched for a local CVS. Then she searched for the menu at a restaurant called 3V. She called her husband. She asked him to go pick up the medicine and the food. She knew the route. She knew the traffic patterns of Duxbury. She knew that from the moment he pulled out of the driveway, she had exactly 24 minutes of total isolation. As we sit here in 2026, the legal battle over Lindsay Clancy has redefined how we look at mental health in the courtroom. Her defense team argued that she was suffering from a severe case of postpartum psychosis, a break from reality fueled by a cocktail of over 13 different psychiatric medications. They claimed she heard voices telling her to kill the kids and herself. But the prosecution presented a different story. They pointed to her journals. Lindsay had written about her resentment toward her children. She wrote that she felt they were a burden that prevented her from living the life she wanted. Most damning was the Apple Maps evidence. She hadn't just looked up the restaurant, she had tracked her husband's progress. She waited until he was at the furthest point from the house before she went to the basement with those exercise bands. Think about the physical reality of that basement. This wasn't a quick act. To use a resistance band to end a life takes minutes of sustained, heavy pressure. She had to do it 3 times. She had to look Cora in the eyes. She had to hear Dawson. She had to hold 7-month-old Callan. When Patrick returned, he didn't just find a crime scene. He found a house where the air had been sucked out of the room. The exercise bands were still there. The takeout food was still in the car. Looking at the evidence of her planning, do you believe this was a mental health crisis, or was it a cold, calculated choice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. In the case of Lindsay Marie Clancy, the legal process is currently at a standstill. Her trial is scheduled to begin on July 20th, 2026. Because she is facing 3 counts of murder, the stakes could not be higher. In the Commonwealth, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory and automatic sentence of life in prison without any possibility of parole. Case 2. Carolyn Riley. The death of 4-year-old Rebecca Riley in Hull, Massachusetts, in December 2006 remains one of the most significant cases in the annals of pediatric medical neglect and maternal culpability. Rebecca's death was not the result of a single violent act, but was the culmination of a prolonged period of systemic over-medication and diagnostic manipulation orchestrated by her parents, Carolyn and Michael Riley. This case serves as a primary example of how the medical system can be co-opted to serve socio-economic ends, specifically the pursuit of supplemental security income, SSI, disability benefits. The Rileys' approach to parenting was characterized by what investigators identified as a pharmaco-custodial strategy. The parents utilized high-dose psychotropic medications not for therapeutic stabilization, but as chemical restraints to manage the behaviors of their 3 children, all of whom were diagnosed with varying degrees of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and pediatric bipolar disorder. The centerpiece of this strategy was the child psychiatrist Dr. Kyoko Kifuji, whose clinical practice became the focus of intense scrutiny following Rebecca's death. Testimony revealed that Carolyn Riley systematically embellished reports of her children's behavioral issues to obtain these powerful diagnoses. In Rebecca's case, the child was diagnosed with ADHD at just 2 years of age and bipolar disorder at age 3. These diagnoses were predicated almost entirely on the mother's descriptions of hyperactivity, sleeplessness, and aggression, behaviors that school teachers and nurses later testified they never observed. The financial motive was stark. The family relied on Social Security disability payments for Michael, Carolyn, and their older children. A successful benefit claim for Rebecca would have provided an additional $630 monthly to the household. The forensic evidence and witness testimony established that Carolyn Riley not only secured these medications through deception, but actively increased dosages beyond medical approval. Pharmacy records indicated that the mother frequently sought early refills, claiming that bottles were lost or damaged by water. This hoarding of clonidine allowed the parents to sedate the children for as long as 15 hours at a time, forcing them to pass out as early as 5 p.m. to prevent them from annoying Michael Riley. The physical impact of this chemical regime on Rebecca was devastating. Witness testimony from the Johnson Early Childhood Center provided a harrowing account of the child's decline throughout 2006. School staff described her as lackadaisical and out of it, often requiring an aide to sit behind her simply to prop up her body. The school nurse used the term floppy doll to describe Rebecca's extreme weakness and lack of motor resistance. Despite these clear physiological markers of over-medication, the parents dismissed concerns, claiming the child was merely tired from not sleeping well. The final days of Rebecca's life illustrate the profound failure of maternal protection. Between December 8 and the 13th of December 2006, Rebecca developed a severe, barking cough and began vomiting repeatedly. Household members James McGonnell and Kelly Williams testified that they begged Carolyn to take the girl to the emergency room, but she refused, falsely claiming that no sick appointments were available at the pediatrician's office. On her final night, As Rebecca sat gasping for air and spitting up red liquid, her mother administered a final dose of clonidine to help her sleep. When paramedics arrived the next morning, they found the child dead on the floor, her face covered in pink-tinged foam, a classic clinical sign of pulmonary edema resulting from a massive overdose. The legal aftermath of the Riley case involved separate trials for the parents. Carolyn Riley was convicted of second-degree murder in February 2010 and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Michael Riley was convicted of first-degree murder under the theory of extreme atrocity or cruelty. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court later affirmed these convictions, rejecting defense arguments that the child died of a fast-moving pneumonia rather than an overdose. Perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the case was the reform of the Department of Social Services, DSS, which was rebranded as the Department of Children and Families, DCF, shortly after. The agency had been under investigation at the time of Rebecca's death, yet social workers had closed multiple reports of neglect as unsubstantiated, even after witnessing Carolyn appearing drugged out and seeing the children too weak to draw with a crayon. The tragedy forced a re-evaluation of how the state handles medically complex cases of neglect and led to the integration of medical specialists into the oversight process. Case 3. Kristen LaBrie. In the historic city of Salem, Massachusetts, a place synonymous with the judgment of women, a modern-day tragedy unfolded in 2009 that would once again force the public to define the line between a struggling mother and a criminal. This is the story of Jeremy Fraser. Jeremy was 9 years old, a boy who navigated the world through the lens of non-verbal autism. His life was already a marathon of challenges when he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was a cancer with an 85% cure rate, provided the patient followed a rigorous, multi-year chemotherapy protocol. But Jeremy's mother, Kristen LaBrie, decided the medicine was a burden she and her son could no longer carry. The investigation didn't begin in a dark alley, but in a brightly lit oncology ward at Massachusetts General Hospital. Doctors were baffled. Jeremy's cancer wasn't just failing to go into remission, it was advancing with a ferocity that defied medical logic for a child supposedly on high-dose chemotherapy. Investigators executed a search warrant for the family's home and found a pharmacy's worth of medication. There were at least 5 different types of life-saving drugs, pills and liquids meant to keep the cancer at bay. They were full. Some bottles hadn't even been opened. The smoking gun in this case wasn't a weapon. It was a lab report. When forensic toxicologists analyzed Jeremy's blood samples from the final months of his life, the results were chilling. There were 0 traces of the prescribed chemotherapy. For 5 months, while Jeremy's body withered and the tumors bloomed, the medicine that could have saved him remained in the cabinet. The legal battle that followed centered on a single, haunting question: why? Kristen LaBrie's defense was built on the maternal mercy narrative. She claimed that seeing her autistic son suffer the violent side effects of chemo, the nausea, the hair loss, the confusion he couldn't vocalize, was more than she could bear. She told the court she stopped the treatments to give him quality of life, essentially choosing a peaceful death over a painful cure. But the prosecution, led by Kate McDougal, saw something much darker. They looked at Kristen's life as a single mother. They saw a woman who felt trapped by the relentless demands of a child with severe special needs. This wasn't about Jeremy's pain. It was about her own. She was tired of the appointments. She was tired of the struggle. She didn't want to be a mother to a sick, autistic child anymore, so she simply stopped being one. The state produced evidence that while Kristen was withholding Jeremy's meds, she was leading a double life, venting her frustrations online and to friends, portraying herself as a martyr while systematically allowing the cancer to execute her son. In 2011, a Salem Superior Court jury rejected the mercy defense. Kristen LaBrie was convicted of attempted murder and child endangerment. The judge called her actions a slow-motion execution. However, the case took a final, complicated turn. Years later, an appeals court overturned the attempted murder conviction, citing a technicality in how the jury was instructed. She was ultimately resentenced on the remaining charges, but the damage to the public psyche was done. Jeremy's death remains a landmark in Massachusetts law. It serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability gap, where a child who cannot speak for themselves depends entirely on the person who might secretly resent their very existence. Many parents of children with special needs felt a strange, uncomfortable empathy for the exhaustion LaBrie faced, even if they condemned her actions. Does the state have a responsibility to intervene sooner when a caregiver shows signs of compassion fatigue? Or is the parent solely responsible for the life they brought into the world? The maternal myth is shattered when we look at Case 4. We are moving from medical neglect to the deepest shadows of squalor. Up next is the Blackstone House of Horrors, where the discovery of a secret child led to a forensic search that uncovered skeletal remains hidden in the walls. Case 4. Erika Murray. In the small, quiet town of Blackstone, the air is usually thick with the scent of pine and New England history. But in August 2014, a different smell began to emanate from a house on Paul Street, a smell so pungent it alerted neighbors to a nightmare unfolding in their own backyard. It began with a knock on a neighbor's door. A young boy, frantic, asked for help to make a baby stop crying. When the neighbor entered Erika Murray's home, they didn't just find a crying infant. They found a house that had been transformed into a vertical tomb of filth. Responding officers described the scene as something beyond human comprehension. Trash was piled 3 feet high in every room. The walls were stained with feces. The floor was a carpet of dirty diapers and rotting food. But the true horror lay in what was hidden within the squalor. As investigators navigated the maze of debris, they discovered 4 living children. 2 of them, a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, were ghost children. They had no birth records, no social security numbers, and had never seen the light of day. They were severely malnourished and lacked basic muscle tone because they had spent their entire lives in darkened rooms, ignored by the world outside. The case transitioned from a neglect investigation to a homicide inquiry when forensic teams began searching the bedroom closets. Behind the piles of clothes and refuse, investigators found cardboard boxes. Inside those boxes were the skeletal remains of 3 infants. One was still wearing a onesie. Another was wrapped in a blanket. The investigation became a race against time and biology. Forensic anthropologists were brought in to examine the tiny, fragile bones. The central question for the prosecution was, were these babies born alive? In many cases of infant abandonment, the hydrostatic test, or lung float test, is used to determine if a baby ever took a breath. In this case, the remains in Blackstone were skeletal. Investigators had to rely on DNA phenotyping and bone density analysis to estimate the age of the infants and whether they had lived long enough to suffer the effects of the house's environment. Erika Murray's defense was built on a foundation of profound mental illness. Her lawyers argued that she lived in a state of disassociation, a mental break so severe that she didn't view the dead infants as children, but as losses she couldn't process. Neighbors and even Murray's own partner, who lived in the house, claimed they had no idea she had been pregnant 3 additional times, nor that there were 2 toddlers living in the upstairs rooms. It was a case of collective blindness or a calculated, years-long deception. In 2019, the House of Horrors case reached a controversial conclusion. While Murray was found guilty of several counts of child cruelty and assault and battery, the judge acquitted her of the second-degree murder charges. The reasoning? The prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the infants in the closets were born alive or that Murray's neglect was the direct cause of their deaths. To the town of Blackstone, the verdict felt like a second betrayal. The house was eventually razed to the ground, scraped from the earth to erase the memory of what happened inside. But for the survivors, the psychological debris remains. In Case 5, Elsa Oliver. In the cold, grey months of late 2013, the city of Fitchburg was forced to look into an abyss that few could comprehend. It started not with a police siren, but with a whisper. An 8-year-old girl, carrying a burden far beyond her years, walked into her school and found the courage to speak to a teacher and a counselor. She didn't just tell them about the bruises on her own small frame. She told them that her 5-year-old brother, Jeremiah, was gone. He had simply vanished from their apartment at 276 Kimball Street. Jeremiah Oliver was a vibrant child, once described as a charmer who could brighten any room with a smile. But for those closest to him, his light had been extinguished long before the rest of the world realized he was missing. When police moved in to search the home of his mother, Elsa Oliver, they were stepping into a curated nightmare of drug addiction and systematic cruelty. Investigators quickly realized that Jeremiah hadn't been seen by anyone outside his 4 walls since mid-September. Elsa had prepared a script for anyone who asked. She told the boys' daycare in June that he was moving to Florida to live with his grandmother. She told neighbors he was away visiting relatives. But inside that apartment, the reality was a slow-motion collapse of maternal protection. Jeremiah's siblings testified to a regime of punishment that sounds like something from a dark era of history. They were forced to kneel for hours in cold showers as discipline. Jeremiah, who struggled with behavioral issues, was reportedly forced to sleep in a kitchen closet. This was the world Elsa Oliver chose for her children, prioritizing her relationship with her boyfriend, Alberto Sierra Jr., over the basic safety of her offspring. As the winter of 2013 turned into the spring of 2014, the search for Jeremiah became one of the most exhaustive and expensive operations in the history of the Commonwealth. Divers scanned the Nashua River, canine units combed the woods, state police stood in lines, shoulder to shoulder, through the frozen terrain of north-central Massachusetts. The breakthrough finally came on April 18, 2014. It wasn't in a shallow grave in the woods, but alongside a busy stretch of Interstate 190 in Sterling. A highway worker spotted a discarded object about 40 feet from the roadway. It was a suitcase, or more accurately, a mechanic's heavy-duty tool bag. Inside, wrapped in a fleece blanket, were the remains of the little boy the world had been praying to find alive. The autopsy results brought more questions than comfort. Because the remains had been exposed to the elements and the passage of 7 months, the medical examiner could not determine a specific biological mechanism of death. In February 2016, the final death certificate was issued: homicide, caused by homicidal violence of undetermined etiology. Forensically, this is a descriptive catch-all. It means that while the bones didn't show a clear bullet hole or a shattered skull, the totality of the circumstances, the concealment, the disposal in a highway suitcase, and the history of abuse proved that Jeremiah had been killed by another person. It would take a decade for the full story to emerge in a courtroom. In 2023, prosecutors finally revealed the alleged catalyst for Jeremiah's death. During a physical altercation between Elsa and Sierra, the 5-year-old boy had approached the man who was terrorizing his mother. He looked at Sierra and said 4 words that should have broken any human heart: "Don't hurt my mommy." Instead of a moment of mercy, Sierra allegedly reacted with a burst of savage rage. He headbutted Elsa, then grabbed Jeremiah by the head and slammed it against the floor with enough force to end his life. He then allegedly picked up the boy's limp body and placed him back into that kitchen closet. Jeremiah's death wasn't just a failure of a mother, it was a catastrophic breakdown of the state's safety net. The Oliver family was under the active supervision of the Department of Children and Families. An investigation later revealed that the social worker assigned to watch over Jeremiah hadn't made a single home visit in over 3 months, a period of 114 days where the state was effectively supervising a 214 days. Ghost. The fallout was political dynamite. 3 DCF employees were fired. The commissioner, Olga Roche, was forced to resign under immense public pressure. Reforms were swept through the agency, but for Jeremiah, they were 10 years too late. Elsa Oliver pleaded guilty in 2017 to assault and battery on her surviving children. She was sentenced to 7.5 years and was released in 2020. Alberto Sierra Jr. served a similar sentence for abuse before being rearrested and indicted for Jeremiah's murder in 2023. As he sits behind bars in 2026, awaiting a trial that has been a decade in the making, the suitcase on the side of I-190 remains the ultimate symbol of maternal abandonment. The pattern of betrayal is only intensifying. We have more cases to uncover, including a 20-year-old secret solved by DNA. If these stories are moving you, hit that like button to help the algorithm share these victims' voices. Case 6. Rachelle Bond. On a humid afternoon in June 2015, a woman walking her dog along the rocky northern shore of Deer Island spotted something that didn't belong. Among the tangled seaweed and harbor debris sat a heavy, black plastic trash bag. When she tore it open, the salt air was replaced by the suffocating weight of a tragedy that would haunt the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for years. Inside was a small child. She was wearing polka-dot leggings and was wrapped in a zebra print fleece blanket. There was no identification. There was no name. For months, she was simply Baby Doe. Her digital likeness, created by forensic artists, was seen by over 60 million people on social media. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, silence was the only response. No one reported her missing. No one claimed her. Before we dive into the forensic breakthrough that finally gave this little girl her name back, I have to ask, where are you watching from today, and what time is it there? If you are new to Cold Read Crimes and want to help us advocate for the victims in these cases, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support ensures these stories are never forgotten. With no DNA matches in any national database and a body that had been exposed to the elements, the trail went cold. That was until investigators turned to an unconventional branch of science, forensic palynology. Every region has a pollen fingerprint, a unique mix of microscopic grains from trees, weeds, and grasses that stick to clothing and blankets. Scientists analyzed the fibers of the zebra print blanket found with Baby Doe. They discovered a specific combination of pine and oak pollen. But there was a catch. The concentration of these grains suggested the child hadn't been in the harbor for long. More importantly, the chemical signature of the soot and minerals trapped alongside the pollen pointed to a very specific geographic area, an urban neighborhood in Boston, likely near a major roadway. This was the first breadcrumb that told police they weren't looking for a tourist or a kidnapped child from another state. They were looking for a local family living in the shadows of the city. In September 2015, 3 months after the discovery, a tip finally broke the case wide open. A man named Michael Sprague contacted authorities after a friend of his, Michael McCarthy, bragged about disciplining a child to death. The child's name was Bella Bond. She was only 2 years old. The investigation led to an apartment on Maxwell Street in Dorchester, where Rachelle Bond lived with her boyfriend, McCarthy. While the entire country was mourning the unidentified Baby Doe, Rachelle had continued to live her life as if nothing had happened. She told her neighbors and family that the Department of Children and Families had taken Bella away. This was a lie, she maintained, while she continued to collect state benefits and use her EBT card to fund a lifestyle of substance abuse. It feels like a somber day for a story like this. We are uncovering the dark side of the maternal protector trope here. If this case is hitting home for you, leave a "Rest in peace, Bella" in the comments to show your support. The details that emerged during the trial were nothing short of horrific. Rachelle Bond claimed that on the night Bella died, Michael McCarthy went into the toddler's room because she was acting out. He allegedly claimed the girl was possessed by demons and that he needed to drive them out. Rachelle testified that she found Michael standing over Bella's body, claiming it was her time to die. The investigation revealed a household fueled by dark spiritualism and heavy drug use. Instead of calling the police, Rachelle helped McCarthy hide Bella's body in a refrigerator for weeks before they finally drove to the waterfront and tossed the weighted trash bag into the waves. The defense tried to paint Rachelle as a woman trapped by fear and addiction, but the prosecution highlighted her calculated moves to keep the state benefits flowing. Do you think the justice system was too lenient on Rachelle Bond for her role in the aftermath? She was allowed to plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact in exchange for her testimony against McCarthy. I want to hear your honest take on the victim versus accomplice debate in the comments below. In 2017, Michael McCarthy was convicted of second-degree murder. Rachelle Bond was sentenced to time served plus probation. The case of Bella Bond changed the way Massachusetts tracks children within the welfare system, but the legislative changes cannot undo the failure of the adults in her life. Today, a small memorial sits on the rocks of Deer Island. It is a reminder that even in a world of advanced forensics and digital footprints, the most vulnerable can still fall through the cracks if no one is looking for them. If you want to see more deep dives into the forensic breakthroughs that solve cold cases, make sure to share this video with a fellow true crime enthusiast. Case 7. Latasha Sanders. On a Monday afternoon in February 2018, the quiet of Prospect Street in Brockton, Massachusetts, was shattered by the arrival of sirens. First responders found 43-year-old Latasha Sanders standing outside her apartment building, distraught and combative. She spoke of a medical emergency, but her behavior was erratic, leading police to secure her third-floor unit. What they found inside was a scene that would lead the Plymouth County District Attorney to label it one of the most cruel and unusual crimes in the city's history. In 2 separate bedrooms, the police found 8-year-old Edson and 5-year-old Lasson. They were tucked into their beds, their blankets pulled up as if they were napping. But they weren't sleeping. They had been subjected to a level of violence that is almost impossible to fathom. The forensics of the Sanders apartment told a story of chilling calculation. Despite the fact that 8-year-old Edson had been stabbed nearly 80 times, there was very little blood on the floors or walls. Investigators quickly realized why. Latasha had spent hours cleaning. She had mopped the crime scene and washed her children's bodies before placing them in their beds to make it look as though they had passed away peacefully. In the kitchen sink, detectives found the weapon, a kitchen knife that had been rinsed, but not thoroughly enough. The State Police Forensic Lab found the biological evidence that linked the mother to the act. During her interrogation, Latasha didn't deny what happened. She claimed she was following a ritual she discovered online, believing that a human sacrifice was the only way to save her dying father. As the investigation proceeded, a darker, more earthly motive began to emerge. While Latasha spoke of voodoo and rituals, investigators found evidence that she was preparing to launch a GoFundMe page and other online fundraisers. They argued that she was planning to profit from the public's sympathy following the mysterious deaths of her sons. This transformed the case from a tragedy of mental illness into a story of cold-blooded greed. The prosecution argued that the cleaning of the apartment proved she had a guilty mind. She knew the ritual wouldn't be accepted by the law, so she tried to hide the evidence of the struggle. In December 2022, a jury in Plymouth Superior Court deliberated for only 4 hours. They rejected the defense's claim that Latasha was legally insane. They saw a woman who was capable of cleaning a crime scene, hiding a weapon, and lying to police. She was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. At her sentencing, the judge was clear. There are no winners in a courtroom where a mother is sent away forever for the lives of her own children. Latasha Sanders will spend the rest of her life in prison without the possibility of parole. Do you think the jury was right to find her sane? Or do you believe the ritualistic nature of the crime points to a broken mind? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Edson and Lasson, known to their friends as Marlon and Lasson, are remembered today not for the way they died, but for the lives they should have had. The city of Brockton continues to hold them in its heart, a somber reminder that the evil mother narrative can sometimes be fueled by a mix of delusion and devastating calculation. Case 8. Tannisia Goodwin. Firefighters are kicking down the door of apartment 706 at 12 Pope Street, only to find the interior doorknob has been intentionally removed. They are breathing through heavy masks, surrounded by thick smoke, and they have no idea they are about to find two children with their throats cut, doused in lighter fluid. This is Case 8 of our deep dive into the most profound betrayals in the Commonwealth. The city of Salem is famous for its history of trials, but on the night of March 18, 2012, a new kind of horror unfolded within the Salem Heights apartments. Before we look at the technical sabotage that turned a home into a death trap, if you are dedicated to seeing justice for the most vulnerable victims, please hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Your support allows us to keep documenting these vital stories. When the Salem Fire Department arrived at the 7th floor unit just after 9 o'clock in the evening, they expected a routine kitchen fire. Instead, they discovered a scene of clinical premeditation. Tannisia Goodwin, a 25-year-old mother, had spent the hours leading up to the blaze systematically neutralizing every safety system in the residence. Forensic teams later documented that Goodwin had meticulously covered the ceiling sprinklers with tape and fabric. She had sealed every air vent in the apartment with duct tape to ensure that smoke and toxic fumes would remain trapped inside the living space. She even disabled the smoke detectors to prevent neighbors from being alerted before the flames took hold. The most damning evidence of her intent was found at the exit. Goodwin had unscrewed and removed the interior doorknob from the front door. This modification ensured that her 8-year-old son, Jamal, would be mechanically unable to open the door and escape the burning unit. This level of technical sabotage transformed a domestic assault into a sophisticated attempt at an inescapable execution. As the apartment filled with smoke, Goodwin transitioned from environmental manipulation to direct physical violence. Using a kitchen knife, she attacked her two children. Jamal bore the brunt of the violence. His throat was slashed with such force that the wound stretched nearly ear to ear, exposing his trachea. His 3-year-old sister, Erika, was also cut. Following the knife attack, Goodwin doused both children in lighter fluid. This action indicates a desire to ensure that if the wounds were not fatal, the accelerant would guarantee their end. In a final, erratic move, Goodwin took Erika into a different apartment, left the toddler on a couch, and fled the building just as first responders were entering. Jamal was left alone behind the handleless door, identifying his mother as the attacker the moment he was rescued by Fire Lieutenants Richard Arno and Mike O'Donnell. This case is a haunting reminder that the most dangerous place for a child can sometimes be in their own home. Hours after the fire was reported, Tannisia Goodwin arrived at the Salem Police Headquarters. She was in a state of extreme agitation, smelling strongly of lighter fluid and sporting a superficial self-inflicted wound on her neck. Before officers could detain her, she shattered a lobby window at the station. During her interrogation, Goodwin claimed she acted to protect her children, implying the event was intended to be a murder-suicide. Her legal team and family members highlighted a lifelong struggle with mental health, noting she had been diagnosed as bipolar since the age of 9. While the defense argued she was not criminally responsible due to her mental state, the prosecution pointed to the duct tape and the removed doorknob as proof of high-level executive function and a clear understanding of the consequences. Do you believe a mental health diagnosis is a sufficient explanation for the technical sabotage of fire safety systems, or should the premeditation override the plea? I want to hear your honest take in the comments below. The legal battle lasted nearly 3 years. On January 2nd, 2015, Tannisia Goodwin appeared in Salem Superior Court. Rather than forcing her children to testify about the night their mother tried to end their lives, she pleaded guilty to all charges, including armed assault with intent to murder and arson. Judge James Lang sentenced her to 20 to 25 years in state prison. The sentence includes 5 years of strict probation, where she is prohibited from having any contact with her children or their guardians. Jamal was eventually adopted by a cousin, and Erika was placed in the custody of her father. While their physical wounds have healed, the impact statements delivered in court reveal that both children continue to carry the deep emotional scars of that night on the 7th floor. The cases of these mothers leave the Commonwealth with a legacy of failure and a desperate search for answers within the science of the mind and the body. From the microscopic pollen grains that gave Bella Bond her name back to the growth arrest lines that spoke for the infants in Blackstone, forensics provides the truth that the perpetrators tried to bury. These stories are not just entries in a crime ledger, they are a rejection of the most basic biological contract. As the legal system prepares for the trial of Lindsay Clancy on July 20th, 2026, the eyes of the nation will once again return to a Massachusetts courtroom. This trial will force a reckoning with the thin line between a medical emergency and a criminal act. While the law seeks a mandatory life sentence for those convicted of first-degree murder, there is no sentence long enough to restore the lives of the children whose light was extinguished by the very people meant to protect them. We remember Cora, Dawson, Callan, Rebecca, Jeremy, Jeremiah, Bella, Edson, Lason, Jamal, and Erika. Their stories remind us that in the shadows of the brightest nursery, the ultimate betrayal is never as far away as we hope. If you made it this far, you're part of a community that refuses to look away. Subscribe to Cold Read Crimes for more stories that uncover the truth, because these victims deserve to be remembered, and these failures deserve to be exposed. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Let's start a conversation. Let's demand better. Stay safe out there, and if you see something, say something. It might save a life.